Have you ever noticed how the truth rarely arrives with a loud announcement? Most of the time, it slips into someone's life through an ordinary conversation, a passing comment, or a sentence that was never meant to change everything. That is exactly what has happened to your soulmate. For so long, they believed they already understood this connection. In their mind, the story was complete. They thought they knew why things unfolded the way they did, why certain distances appeared, and why your heart responded the way it did. They trusted the version of events they had quietly accepted, never realizing that one important piece had always been missing. But the universe has a remarkable way of revealing what human assumptions cannot hide forever. Without warning, someone said something they were never supposed to say. It wasn't planned. It wasn't an attempt to expose anyone. It was simply an honest moment that accidentally uncovered a truth powerful enough to shake everything your soulmate believed. Suddenly, memories that once seemed clear no longer fit together. Conversations they had forgotten began returning to their mind. Small details they once ignored started demanding attention. They are beginning to understand that what they believed about this connection may have never been the complete story. Imagine trying to solve a puzzle while someone quietly hides the most important piece. No matter how hard you try, the picture never feels right. Then one day, that missing piece suddenly appears, and within seconds everything that once looked confusing begins making perfect sense. That is exactly what is happening inside your soulmate's heart. They are discovering that someone else's words may have shaped the way they saw you, while your silence allowed those misunderstandings to grow. You never fought to control the narrative because deep down you believed the truth should never have to compete with noise. The painful reality is that people often trust the first story they hear, especially when they have no reason to question it. But once the truth begins revealing itself, even the strongest assumptions become impossible to defend. Now your soulmate finds themselves standing between two completely different versions of the past, wondering how they could have misunderstood someone whose actions never truly matched the story they were told. They are beginning to ask questions they never thought they would ask. What if you were never the person they believed you were? What if someone else's perspective quietly influenced the way they judged your heart? What if your silence wasn't hiding guilt at all, but protecting your peace from a battle you knew truth would eventually win? Stay with me, because what this unexpected revelation uncovers next doesn't simply change how your soulmate sees this connection. It completely transforms the way they see the people they once trusted without question. The most convincing stories are not always the truest ones. Sometimes a single version of events gets repeated so many times that people stop questioning it altogether. That is exactly what happened here. Your soulmate never intentionally chose to misunderstand you. They simply trusted what seemed believable at the time. A few carefully placed words, a missing detail, an emotional opinion presented as fact, or even someone's silence when the truth should have been spoken, slowly shaped the way they looked at your connection. The strange thing about assumptions is that once they settle into the heart, they begin influencing every memory that follows. Every conversation between you was interpreted through that invisible filter. Every moment of distance became proof of what they already believed. Every silence seemed to confirm a story that had quietly been written by someone else's perspective. They never stopped to ask whether they had seen the entire picture because they didn't realize there was another side waiting to be understood. As the old saying reminds us, half the truth can be more dangerous than a complete lie. They are only beginning to understand how powerful those missing pieces really were. Imagine looking through a window covered with colored glass. Everything outside appears tinted, even though the world itself has never changed. The trees remain green, the sky remains blue, but your eyes can only see the color of the glass. That was what happened to your soulmate. They weren't seeing your heart directly. They were seeing it through someone else's emotions, someone else's conclusions, someone else's unfinished version of the story. Every act of kindness you offered was questioned. Every quiet decision you made was misunderstood. Even your attempts to protect the connection were interpreted in ways you never intended. Yet you noticed something they couldn't see. You realized that no explanation would matter if someone had already decided what they wanted to believe. So instead of fighting every accusation or correcting every misunderstanding, you chose something far more difficult. You chose silence, not because you had nothing to say, but because you understood that arguments rarely change hearts that are still listening through someone else's voice. Perhaps there were moments when you wanted to defend yourself, moments when every part of you wanted to say, "That isn't what really happened." You may have imagined explaining every detail, clearing every misunderstanding, and finally telling your side of the story. But deep inside, something kept stopping you. You knew that truth forced into unwilling ears often sounds like another excuse. Genuine understanding cannot be pushed into someone's heart before they are ready to receive it. So while others continued shaping opinions, you quietly carried the weight of being misunderstood. That burden was heavier than anyone realized because you weren't only losing someone's trust, you were watching someone you deeply cared about drift further away while believing a version of you that never truly existed. As another timeless saying teaches us, the truth never fears time. Your heart held onto that belief even when every day seemed to prove otherwise. Imagine an author writing a beautiful book while someone else secretly removes entire chapters before it reaches the reader. The reader finishes the story confused, believing the ending makes no sense. They blame the author, never realizing they were never given the complete book. That was your connection. Important chapters were missing. Moments of your loyalty, your patience, your quiet sacrifices, your reasons for stepping back, your attempts to protect the relationship. None of those chapters were fully seen. Your soulmate judged the ending without ever reading everything that came before it. They believed they understood your decisions, but they only understood the fragments that reached them. Now, as unexpected pieces begin returning, they are starting to realize just how much of your story was left untold. Something inside your soulmate has begun changing because the memories no longer fit together the way they once did. They remember conversations where your reactions seemed strangely calm. They remember moments when you accepted blame too quickly instead of arguing. At the time, they thought your silence confirmed the accusations. Now they wonder if your silence was actually protecting everyone from a conflict that would have created even more pain. They are beginning to notice inconsistencies they overlooked before. The story they accepted with such certainty suddenly feels incomplete. Small details they dismissed are now impossible to ignore. Every new realization creates another question, and every question slowly weakens the version of events they once trusted without hesitation. The hardest realization of all is beginning to settle into their heart. They are starting to understand that while someone else was speaking loudly, you were speaking quietly through your actions. While another person was influencing opinions, you were simply trying to preserve your peace. They are discovering that character is not revealed by who tells the most convincing story, but by who remains consistent even when misunderstood. Your kindness never disappeared. Your respect never disappeared. Your integrity never disappeared. Those qualities remained steady, even while false assumptions tried to redefine who you were. And now your soulmate finds themselves replaying every memory with completely different eyes, wondering whether the person they questioned was actually the only one who had been quietly protecting this connection all along. That realization is opening a door they never expected to walk through, because the more they remember, the more they begin to suspect that someone didn't just misunderstand your heart. Someone may have benefited from making sure it stayed misunderstood. There are moments when the truth doesn't arrive as a dramatic confession. It arrives as a quiet realization that refuses to leave your mind. One unexpected sentence leads to another memory. One forgotten detail connects with another, and suddenly an entire story begins to rearrange itself. That is exactly what is happening inside your soulmate right now. The conversation they recently had may have lasted only a few minutes, but its impact continues echoing through every memory they have of you. At first, they tried to dismiss it. They told themselves it couldn't be true because it challenged everything they had believed for so long. But the more they thought about it, the more impossible it became to ignore. Pieces that never fit together before suddenly began forming a picture that felt painfully clear. As the old saying reminds us, a single candle can reveal what years of darkness managed to hide. That unexpected truth has become the light exposing everything they never noticed while they were standing too close to see it. Imagine reading an old letter after years have passed. The words haven't changed, but your understanding has. The same sentences now carry emotions you completely missed the first time. That is how every memory of you feels to them now. They remember conversations where you seemed strangely calm, even while being misunderstood. At the time, they assumed your silence meant you had nothing meaningful to say. Now they wonder if your silence came from knowing that defending yourself would only create another argument built on assumptions. They remember moments when you quietly stepped away instead of proving your innocence. Back then, they interpreted that distance as guilt. Today, it feels more like dignity. They are beginning to understand that not every person who remains silent has something to hide. Sometimes, silence belongs to someone who has grown too tired of explaining their heart to people who have already decided what to believe. As another timeless truth says, the strongest truth rarely raises its voice. Your actions had been speaking all along. They simply weren't listening with the right understanding. Perhaps the hardest realization for your soulmate is recognizing how often your character contradicted the story they accepted. If you truly were the person they believed you to be, why did your actions continue showing kindness? Why did you continue wishing them well, even after being misunderstood? Why did you refuse to seek revenge, expose anyone, or turn others against them? These questions have become impossible to silence. The version of you they carried in their heart no longer matches the person they now remember. They are realizing that while someone else offered explanations filled with emotion, you quietly offered consistency. Your respect never changed. Your compassion never disappeared. Even your distance now feels different because it no longer looks like rejection. It looks like someone protecting their peace after every attempt to be understood had quietly failed. They are discovering that integrity leaves behind a pattern that false stories can imitate for only so long. Imagine a mirror covered with dust for years. From a distance, the reflection appears distorted, and people assume the mirror itself is damaged. Then someone gently wipes away the dust, and suddenly the reflection becomes perfectly clear. Nothing about the mirror changed. Only what was covering it disappeared. That is exactly what is happening to your soulmate's understanding of this connection. The truth hasn't changed. Your heart hasn't changed. What has changed is the layer of misunderstanding that stood between reality and perception. With every forgotten memory that returns, another layer disappears. They remember the concern in your voice when no one else was paying attention. They remember the patience you showed during difficult moments. They remember how often you chose peace over proving a point. Those memories once seemed ordinary. Now they feel extraordinary because they completely contradict the story they believed. Every recollection becomes another piece of evidence that your heart was never working against the connection. It was quietly trying to protect it. There is another question beginning to grow inside them, and it is perhaps the most painful one of all. Who truly benefited from keeping the truth hidden? The more they think about it, the more they realize that confusion rarely appears without a source. Misunderstandings don't always grow naturally. Sometimes they are watered by fear, insecurity, jealousy, or the desire to control how one person sees another. They are not rushing to blame anyone, but they can no longer ignore the possibility that someone else's perspective shaped decisions that should have been made from personal experience. That realization is deeply unsettling because it forces them to accept that they may have judged someone they loved without first seeking the complete truth. As another old saying wisely teaches, judge slowly, for the heart often sees only what the mind has been taught to believe. Those words now echo inside them with surprising clarity. Now your soulmate finds themselves standing at the edge of an emotional awakening they never expected. They are replaying every goodbye, every misunderstanding, every quiet moment with completely different eyes. They are no longer asking whether this connection mattered. They already know it did. The question haunting them now is far more personal. How much of the pain between you was created not by a lack of love, but by believing a story that was never fully true? The more they search their memories, the more one realization keeps returning. You never tried to win against anyone. You simply waited for truth to do what truth has always done, arrive in its own time. And now that it finally has, everything they once believed is quietly falling apart, making room for a version of your heart they should have seen from the very beginning. One of the greatest misunderstandings in life is believing that defending yourself is always the strongest response. Sometimes it is. But sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when your peace is more valuable than winning an argument that another person has already decided the outcome of. That was the choice you quietly made, even though it cost you more than anyone realized. While others were busy explaining, accusing, defending, and trying to shape opinions, you chose something that looked like weakness from the outside, but required extraordinary strength within. You refused to spend your energy convincing people to see a heart they were not yet ready to understand. It wasn't because you didn't have the truth. It was because you understood something that only experience can teach. Truth forced upon a closed heart rarely becomes understanding. It simply becomes another argument. As the old saying reminds us, the sun never argues with the clouds. It simply waits until they pass. That became your silent philosophy. You trusted that time would reveal what explanations never could. Imagine standing beside a clear lake while someone throws stones into the water. The harder you fight the ripples, the murkier the reflection becomes. But if you simply allow the water to become still again, everything hidden beneath the surface naturally appears. That was your approach to this connection. You understood that reacting to every misunderstanding would only create more confusion. Every accusation answered with another accusation would only deepen the distance. Every attempt to prove yourself would make it seem as though your value depended on another person's approval. Instead, you chose stillness, not because you stopped caring, but because you cared enough not to destroy your own peace, trying to control how others perceived you. They mistook your silence for surrender, when in reality, it was one of the bravest decisions your heart had ever made. Perhaps there were countless nights when you questioned that decision. Maybe you wondered whether speaking louder would have changed everything. Maybe you replayed conversations in your mind, imagining what might have happened if you had defended yourself more fiercely or exposed everything you knew. Those thoughts are natural because every sincere heart longs to be understood. But wisdom often arrives with a difficult lesson. You cannot force clarity into someone whose vision is still clouded by assumptions. You cannot make another person see what they are emotionally unwilling to acknowledge. So while your heart carried the burden of being misunderstood, it also carried something even greater: faith. Faith that genuine character eventually reveals itself without needing constant advertisement. As another timeless truth says, character whispers while reputation shouts. Reputation depends on what people say about you. Character depends on who you remain when nobody believes your side of the story. Imagine an ancient oak tree standing through every season. Children carve their names into its bark. Storms break its branches. Travelers rest beneath its shade without ever thanking it. Yet the tree never stops growing toward the light. It doesn't waste its strength arguing with the wind or proving its value to those passing by. It simply continues becoming what it was always meant to be. That is exactly what your soul has been doing. Every misunderstanding became another season that strengthened your roots instead of weakening them. Every false assumption became another opportunity to choose dignity over bitterness. While others focused on controlling appearances, you focused on protecting your integrity. Looking back now, your soulmate is beginning to notice something remarkable. Despite everything that happened, your actions never became cruel. Your words never became filled with hatred. Your heart never sought revenge. If the story they believed about you had truly been accurate, why did your character remain so consistent? Why did kindness continue appearing, even after you had every reason to walk away with resentment? Those questions are becoming impossible for them to ignore. Another realization has begun, quietly reshaping the way your soulmate sees this entire connection. They are starting to understand that people who manipulate situations often depend on emotional reactions. They expect anger. They expect endless arguments. They expect chaos because chaos keeps the truth buried beneath confusion. But when someone responds with quiet confidence instead of emotional warfare, that strategy slowly begins to collapse. Your silence wasn't giving anyone victory. It was refusing to become part of a battle that would have damaged everyone involved. You weren't protecting a lie. You were protecting your soul from becoming someone you were never meant to be. There is profound strength in walking away from conversations that only exist to misunderstand you. There is deep wisdom in allowing time to answer questions that emotions cannot. Now your soulmate is seeing your silence through completely different eyes. They no longer interpret it as avoidance or guilt. They recognize it as emotional maturity that they simply weren't ready to appreciate before. They are beginning to admire the courage it took for you to carry misunderstanding without becoming consumed by it. They see how easily you could have exposed every hidden truth, confronted every false story, and fought for immediate validation. Instead, you trusted something far greater than temporary approval. You trusted that truth has its own timing. As another old saying wisely teaches, gold does not lose its value because someone mistakes it for stone. Your heart never stopped being genuine simply because someone else failed to recognize it. And perhaps that is the lesson your soulmate will carry for the rest of their life. The greatest surprise was never discovering what really happened. The greatest surprise was realizing how peacefully you carried a burden that would have turned many hearts bitter. Now they understand that your silence was never the absence of truth. It was the quiet confidence of someone who knew that what is real never needs to chase belief forever. Because sooner or later, truth always finds its own voice. As this message comes to its final chapter, there is one truth that quietly rises above every misunderstanding, every unanswered question, and every painful memory. The truth is that real connections are never destroyed by love itself. They are often tested by incomplete stories, hidden perspectives, and moments when two hearts stop seeing each other clearly. For so long, your soulmate believed they had reached the end of your story together. They thought they understood why things happened the way they did. They accepted a version of the past that seemed complete because it was the only version they had. But now, after the unexpected truth has come into the light, they are standing in a place they never imagined they would reach. Every certainty they once held has been replaced with reflection. Every judgment has become a question. Every assumption has slowly given way to understanding. As the old saying reminds us, when the fog disappears, the mountain was never lost, it was only hidden. That is exactly what has happened to this connection. The love was never completely gone. The truth was simply waiting for the right moment to become visible. Imagine spending years believing that one door had been permanently locked, only to discover that it was never locked at all. It had simply been blocked by something standing in front of it. The moment that obstacle is removed, the door opens with almost no effort. That is what your soulmate is experiencing inside their heart. The barrier was never your love. It was the misunderstanding that quietly stood between two people who cared more deeply than either of them realized. They are now looking back at moments that once filled them with certainty, only to realize those moments were built upon information that was never complete. The words you spoke now sound different. The silences you kept now carry meaning. Even the distance that once felt like rejection now feels like a quiet act of self-respect. And they are beginning to understand that you weren't walking away from love. You were walking away from confusion that no longer allowed love to breathe. As another timeless truth says, perspective can change the past without changing a single event. Nothing about your history together has changed, yet everything about how they remember it has. Perhaps you've wondered whether the truth arriving now is simply too late. Maybe part of your heart still asks whether understanding would have made a difference if it had come sooner. Those questions are natural because every sincere soul hopes that one day its intentions will finally be seen. But healing does not depend on changing yesterday. Healing begins the moment truth replaces illusion. Whether this realization leads your paths back together or simply brings peace to both of your hearts, something important has already happened. The burden of being misunderstood is no longer yours alone to carry. Your soulmate now sees the weight you quietly carried without asking anyone to rescue you. They recognize the dignity with which you handled situations that could have easily filled another heart with bitterness. They understand that your silence wasn't emptiness. It was wisdom waiting for time to reveal what words could not. As another old saying wisely teaches, time is the friend of truth and the enemy of deception. Time has finally done what arguments never could. Imagine a stained glass window inside an old cathedral. During the night, it appears dark and lifeless. People walking past hardly notice its beauty. But the moment morning sunlight shines through it, every hidden color suddenly comes alive. The glass didn't become more beautiful overnight. The light simply revealed what had always been there. Your heart is that stained glass window. The compassion you carried, the patience you showed, the love you protected, and the integrity you refused to abandon were always part of who you were. They simply remained unseen while misunderstanding blocked the light. Now your soulmate is finally seeing those colors for the first time. They are recognizing the kindness behind your silence, the loyalty behind your distance, and the strength behind your decision not to fight every false assumption. Instead of remembering you through someone else's version of events, they are finally remembering you through the truth of your own character. That realization is humbling because it forces them to admit that the person they questioned may have been the very person protecting the connection in ways they never recognized. There is another lesson quietly unfolding inside their heart, one that may stay with them for the rest of their life. They are learning that not every loud voice deserves to be believed, and not every quiet heart deserves to be doubted. They are discovering that genuine character reveals itself over time, while false narratives eventually collapse under the weight of their own inconsistencies. The more they reflect, the more they understand that your actions always spoke more honestly than the stories surrounding you. You continued choosing respect when resentment would have been easier. You continued protecting your peace when proving yourself would have been exhausting. You refused to become someone else's reflection of anger because your soul was committed to remaining true to itself. That kind of emotional strength cannot be imitated for long. It can only be lived. And now they finally see it. And perhaps this is the true ending the universe had been preparing from the very beginning. Not an ending built on revenge, not one filled with guilt or blame, but one rooted in clarity. Your soulmate can never look at this connection the same way again, because they can no longer look at you the same way. The truth has restored something that misunderstanding quietly stole, the ability to see your heart as it truly is. Whether life writes another chapter for the two of you, or simply allows this realization to become a source of healing, one thing is now certain. The story that once separated your hearts no longer has power over them. The wrong version has finally fallen away, making room for what was always waiting beneath it. And the greatest miracle was never that a third party accidentally revealed the truth. The greatest miracle was that, through that unexpected moment, Your soulmate finally discovered the real person who had been standing before them all along. A heart that remained honest, peaceful and full of love, even when the world around it struggled to understand it.